Today, our guest is Corey, an activist, model, and speaker who is a woman of trans experience. Corey, welcome. It's so nice to finally meet you and have a conversation.
Yeah, it's nice to be Zoom talking to you.
Zoom friends. We're zoomed in, as they would say. I was so excited for this conversation today because you shared your story on Half the Story. I think it was a bit over a year ago, and you've made so many strides since then. And right now, there's so many young people who are alone in this epidemic of isolation. I think the mental health pandemic is really the invisible pandemic. And for young people there are so many young people who are at home in situations where they don't feel safe in their identities. And I think that you're such a beacon of hope for these young individuals. And today, what I'm really hoping to learn is just more about you and how you've come from where you started to where you are. And so with that, I'd love to kind of take things back to what it was like when you were little. Like, I just want to hear about your story and just where this all began.
Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, that was very nice of you to say. Where it began, I guess the gender of it all, like where I discovered that was probably around, I guess before I can actually remember, around 2 years old. I asked my mom if I could have like a Cinderella dress. I was obsessed with Disney princesses and Barbies. And she really didn't think much of it. And the next phone call she made, she was talking to a friend. She asked if that friend had a dress that I could have. And it wasn't a Cinderella dress, but I ended up wearing this like red dress every day. And I was a pretty happy kid. Like, even if I went to school in boy clothes, I would run home and take off those clothes and put on like my favorite like red dress and walk around in my Barbie heels. And I was a really happy kid like that. I think I didn't, we're taught gender, we're taught sexuality, we're taught race and religion. These are all things that have been put on to us when we're very little. And I think for me, when I really started to realize something was a little bit different about myself than my friends, was when parents really started becoming weird with me, like having sleepovers with their daughters or playing dress up with their daughters. Or I would be in like the Barbie aisle in Toys R Us and my brother would be like weirded out, like small things like that weren't directly said to me. But in kindergarten, I did have a teacher who told me I couldn't play dress up anymore. And my mom went in there and she's like, don't ever tell my child what they can or cannot do in their free time. So I was a really happy kid and I really loved expressing myself. But as I, got into elementary school and moved from LA to New Jersey and kind of caught the vibe, I realized something was a little bit just like different about who I was. And I couldn't understand why people didn't see me the way I saw myself. Like, I really just was like a little girl and I had crushes on boys and I twiddled my, short blonde hair. And I did all those things that my girlfriends were doing. And I didn't see anything wrong with it, but I knew that something was because of how people just reacted towards me. But overall, I was a really, really happy kid.
That's amazing. And I'm so curious how it seems like your family, from what I know, is very supportive of you. And that's definitely not the case for so many young people. And so I'm curious what those initial conversations were like with your mom and your family when you decided to make your transition.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, just because everyone kind of knew something was me. I think because I was born in 93, I was going through elementary school and that in like the late 90s, early 2000s, trans wasn't a thing that anyone would ever assume upon a child.
Right.
They would be gay. So my family kind of already knew that I wasn't going to be this like straight hetero cis guy, cis white guy, like the typical mold that you would think of when you would look at me. There was a vibe there. And I think my grandparents, even once they like sought a therapist who had told them like, introduce boy toys to Corey, like do not, let Corey have Barbies, like give Corey race cars, whatever. And that did not go well for them. And I rejected like the gifts when they would give me boy toys, and they never did it again. So they knew something was going to happen. And when I found the term trans, I was actually getting ready for my bar mitzvah, or it was right around my bar mitzvah age. And I saw the word trans, and the sentence was trapped in the wrong body. And like, I immediately identified with that. And I was 12 and told my mom pretty soon after that I wanted to be a girl. And she was like, okay. And I kind of expressed to her that I had this whole fantasy world in my head. Cause at that point, I'm in middle school. I knew I was a boy, so to speak. And I didn't know that anyone else in the world felt the same way I did. I really, truly thought like, I am insane. Like, how come I feel like a girl, but everyone's telling me I'm a boy? Like, what is this? And so when I saw trans, like it was the biggest relief, because I was like, oh my God, there's a word for how I feel, like someone else in this entire world. And the article was actually on a female to male. So it was the opposite of what I wanted to go through, but I still identified with that. And
wow.
Yeah, which is crazy. You don't need to see exactly you to be able to understand what's going on or have a word for it. And I don't believe that we're trapped in the wrong body like I used to, but I definitely think, there's a transition in play into different degrees. I'm on one end of the spectrum of transitioning, but some people don't need a full transition.
Right.
So when I told her that, she was she was accepting right away. And I just asked, can I go to high school as a girl? And she's like, I don't know. Like, we got to figure this out. And at the time there were a movie like The Hot Chick, where you just like wake up and you're a girl, or White Chicks when you can like go dressed up. And I wanted to do something like that, but I just didn't know that there was actually a way to properly transition. And that took some time. She didn't really find anyone who would see me until I was a junior in high school.
Really?
Yeah. So between the time I'm like 12, 13 and like 15, 16 is like
years.
High school and the end of middle school, where you're so awkward already. And then I had to get up every morning and dress a body that I hated. And that's where like the happy kid kind of faded away. And like I became a little bit more angry, a little bit more bitchy, a little bit just, subconsciously upset with the world and myself. And that took a big toll on me. And to this day, I'm still working through that. It's a trauma having to do that for anyone. But, specifically for trans people, we deal with a lot of trauma that we can't avoid if we want to be our authentic selves. And my family, when they realized I was transitioning, because I asked my mom when I was 12 not to tell anyone. And she said, well, I have to tell who's now my ex-stepdad, but my stepdad at the time said, that's fine. But when we did tell my grandparents, they're like, well, that makes sense. And when we did tell my brother, it was like, that makes sense. And when I did tell a couple of my friends, when I started transitioning, they were like, it just made sense for Corey in high school. Like that, it was like the missing link, because people would ask me if I was gay. And because I knew the term trans, but didn't want to tell anyone about it, I would say, no, I'm not gay. They said, well, what are you? And I'm like, I don't know. I can't like explain it. And people really still thought that was like a gender back then. A sexuality. They didn't understand that there could be like this thing of like trans and cis and what have you. So it was a little weird at first, but just like trying to navigate the world when there was no social media to really Google a trans model or celebrity or anything like that. There was no one for me to look up to. So it was odd to navigate at first. But then when I transitioned and I felt good about myself, I went along.
Coasting.
Yeah, for a little while. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. It's so powerful, and I find it fascinating that someone wouldn't see you from the time that you were 12 to the time that you were a junior in high school. So you were definitely a warrior, because high school is such a tumultuous time, and it's already so challenging to fit in. And to not feel comfortable in your own identity and try to fit in is one of the most isolating experiences that anyone can have. And you mentioned this briefly, that in high school, you didn't have role models on social media and you didn't have ways to really get information. And I feel like there was even still a stigma around the LGBTQ plus movement back when, because we're about the same age. there wasn't liberation. There wasn't any source of this, normalcy. Like, especially, for me, I was in the Midwest. So people, they didn't accept that. And I'm curious what role social media has played in your identity recently, because from what I hear is that, in the trans community, it's amazing and that there are role models, but it's also very competitive. And I'm curious as to what your experience has been and what the biggest misconceptions are.
Yeah, like infighting. There's a lot of infighting in the community.
That's what I've heard. I hear it's like there's a whole social ladder.
There is. And I think one of the worst parts about social media is the competition for followers and likes and engagement and who is deemed famous by the most followers. It's an interesting thing because I get caught up in it myself. But when I did start the transition, which was 2009, which is 10 years ago, 11 years ago at this point, there was still like Gay Straight Alliance in high school. Like it wasn't like LGBTQ. There wasn't LGBT. It was LGB or Gay Straight Alliance. And so it was a really different time. So yeah, no, there was no, maybe Twitter and Facebook were definitely around, but there was no Instagram. He was still using a BlackBerry. So there was just, Caitlyn Jenner hadn't come out. I think Laverne Cox was maybe about to star in Orange is the New Black, but really that there was no one to look up to, no one to find. There was no community in Instagram. Twitter was building a community. Facebook was just building its community. So that online community, in a sense, to me, I didn't have it all. I never was a part of chat rooms or MySpace, things like that. So when I went off to high school, I lived stealth. So I never really told anyone that I was trans. And that, again, was traumatic for me. I didn't know it and only added to like my underlying anger with the world. But because I lived cisgender and lived like a quote unquote normal life, I had kind of a different experience with being a part of the trans community because I didn't identify as trans.
Right.
So I didn't have trans friends. I wasn't looking for a community online. I'm sure the communities were there. I just wasn't seeking them, nor did I feel like I needed it. And when I had told a few people at the end of college or right after college, but before I came out publicly and told everyone I was trans, a lot of people told me to not and said like, trans people will hate you. Trans women will not like you. You're too privileged. You're too pretty. You, whatever it is, and they won't connect with you and they won't like you and you won't be, you can't be a face of the community because you don't look like them and you don't act like them and you aren't one of them. And so that really put me off and made me nervous to come out and like be myself because I thought like, cis hetero people aren't going to accept me and then trans people aren't going to accept, like it was a very weird time to navigate. So the Orlando shooting happened in June 2016, which was a year after Caitlyn had came out. So there was knowledge, people knew, there was a celebrity to look for. Laverne Cox was gaining success. Gigi Gorgeous was gaining success. They all had their successes. People were starting to talk about it, but there was still a big stigmatized version of what a trans woman was.
Right.
And I knew that if I came out and told my story, all these people who had met me within these 5 years who never once knew and had conversations about transgender people in front of me could say like, oh my God, I was in a room with a trans woman. Like it would almost be like a joke's on them. I've treated that person normally. Why can't I treat every other trans person normally?
Wow.
So that's when I sought for a community online when I came out myself. And I had a good response, but it took me a really long time to find trans women who would accept me. And that didn't happen until I moved to LA. Which was shortly after I came out, but 3 years ago now. And I met a few trans women out, but I also don't go out in what they call the gayborhood in Los Angeles, in WeHo. I go to more like heteronormative, straight bars and things like that. And I have a lot of trans friends who do not go to those places because out of safety and they don't feel comfortable.
Wow.
So, and that was hard for me to find community both online and in person because we weren't going to the same places. We weren't following the same accounts. We weren't following each other. And it took me going to Pride actually to start meeting trans girls, and then went to a trans march and finally found like another trans actress and model who off the bat accepted me. And I thought that was so refreshing because had been told for so many years, like trans girls aren't going to accept you. And when she did that and was able to have like a really open, honest conversation about dating and sex and just everything and surgeries. And we have two totally different mindsets on surgery and things like that. And I was like, oh my God, like I have someone I can finally connect to about this. There's no girlfriends that I'd had prior that were cisgender could really truly understand exactly what I've been through as a woman of trans experience.
Right. By
following her and looking at other accounts and meeting more trans women, that's when I got tuned into like the online community of being transgender and the hashtags and researching that way and seeing what people are sharing about their stories, what people want to learn more of, going on YouTube, what's being discussed, what's not being discussed. Do they want pictures? Do they want video content? Basic questions that you think would be answered, like, can I get a period? Like people just don't know. And I realize it's about, yes.
What is the answer? Tell the listeners.
No, obviously I cannot get a period. I don't menstruate. I don't have ovaries. I don't have a uterus. But I think it's yes about like uplifting the community within the community online. But I also think it's about educating people who aren't in the community.
Absolutely.
And that's what I've focused on online is yes, making sure that trans people and everyone feel inspired and motivated and see a happy, positive success story of a trans woman, but also educate so many of my cis heteronormative followers who need to be educated in order to accept and then stand up for the community.
And there's so much power in that. And I applaud you for your ability to be courageous and do that, because I think a lot of the reason why as society we're held back is because we can't sit across the table from people who are different from us or who don't see eye to eye with our political views. But ultimately it's the conversations that we have together, whether they're filled with tension or not, that move us forward in society. And I think there are so many people that are eager to learn, and it's so much easier to speak to people who understand you than it is to speak to people who don't. And so that's also part of the reason why I've been really fascinated by you and your journey, because, by the way that you post on social media, it almost feels very relatable to me, and that your life very much so looks a lot like my life, but you're also able to champion your community. Whereas some other individuals I follow, it almost feels like all they want to do is champion their community and what they identify with, so much so to the other end, which I think is great for them. But then it almost feels a little bit disconnecting for people who want to understand and want to be a part of that narrative. And so I think there's this interesting balance, because a lot of people are so curious and they also want to be able to get the right information. And you're the best person to speak on that. You are the expert. You're the expert that can dumb this down for people who, might not know or might not even know this is an option for them. Right. And I'm curious, just in your own experience on social media, you were, this is fascinating that you were the first trans prom queen, but I'm curious how many younger high schoolers reach out to you who've seen your story and share about them. Like, how do you have a lot of young people reaching out on social media to you about this?
I do. It's interesting. I have all ages, I would say. Like, there are a lot of older trans people who see a lot of what they could have had in me, and they reach out, which is really nice, because I never want to make an older person who missed their opportunity to transition before hormones or puberty and things like that. I never want to make them upset or feel bad about themselves because they didn't have the transition they wanted. But then I have the other end, which is like trans kids who, have discovered that they're trans because they found me. Or a girl who, not anymore, but went to the high school that I went to. And she's like, I know I'm trans because I heard about, everyone talks about you in our town. And they said that there was a trans girl a couple years before. I looked you up on Facebook. I found your story, and I realized I am trans. I'm not just gay. Or, it's things like that, which makes it all worth it. I do struggle a lot with like how much I do and don't share, because you're right. I don't only post about being trans. I actually probably don't even post enough about being trans. I really don't post a lot about it, just because for so long I didn't identify with it, and it's not my sole being. Like, not everything about me is the fact that I've had trans experience. So it's interesting because like one person who I've helped, like that makes it worth it for me. And then being able to really influence like someone who went to my town, like went through a similar situation with the same type of people, like that also means a lot. It was not an easy town to grow up in. And I think what kids now are able to do is like really find everything I couldn't. They can find out about what hormone replacement therapy is and hormone blockers and the effects of it and videos and hair tutorials and makeup. I mean, the world is literally at kids' fingertips. But what is also very interesting about that is some really don't know until they're exposed to it online, because we don't teach it in schools. We're not, really educating on a public level about this right now. So it's not in health classes. They're teaching about deodorant and sex and condoms. They're not teaching about like gender and sexuality. So it's interesting, but it's lovely. I appreciate all the messages and all that. It's what keeps me going. Otherwise, I don't think I would still have my social media, to be honest.
Yeah, it's social media. Everyone has a very interesting relationship with it. And I'm curious how social media plays and has played into your ability to find your authentic self, whether it's, worked with you or against you. Because for a lot of young people that we speak to and half the story, social media complicates their ability to understand who they actually are. And I think if you're trying to combat and figure out what your orientation is or what you relate to while navigating the digital world, it can be tenfold complicated. And so how have you navigated this, and what advice do you have for young people who are struggling with their sense of identity and self?
Interesting. Yeah, it is a love-hate relationship with social media, and I absolutely would not have it if it wasn't for the followers that I have. And I feel like I built that community there for them finally, which is nice. I found myself, especially in Los Angeles when I moved here, which is when I started to really put effort into my Instagram, that I was comparing myself so much to cis, wealthy, well-off models and actors and socialites and Instagram people, influencers who were buying a Rolex by the time they were 25. And then I put that on myself. Oh my God, I need to buy a Rolex by 25. I need to look like this. I need to be in that place. And for me, it was a lot of like career and also like what I look like. And I worked hard to get to how I look now, and like with a world of LA and plastic surgery and the ease of changing your appearance and all of that stuff, which is interesting to a person with gender dysphoria. Like, I think it also is a negative, because people who are either just realizing that they're trans or just starting to go through whatever transition process they're going through are so, and I'm talking from experience, like need something to grasp onto and have inspo from and to look at. One, a lot of looks are unattainable naturally. And two, it says like, you have to look this way. For me, because I was a little bit older by the time I got into social media, I'm like, listen, I look like what I look like. I'm not getting plastic surgery. I don't want to change anything about myself. But for people who are young and impressionable, it's saying like, oh, well, my transition needs to look like this. I need to have big boobs and a small nose and big lips and perfectly blown out hair. And like, it puts a pressure on people who are already having a lot of pressure in their lives and figuring out their hormones and what balance works for them. And the immense pain that it takes both mentally and physically to transition, like that's enough to worry about. And then you're worrying about like, oh, I saw this trans influencer. I'm not talking about myself. This trans influencer did this, looks this way. I should do that too. Or I want to be years ahead of where I am right now, or I wish I could start right now, or I wish I could have surgery tomorrow, or the older generations who wish that they could have transitioned younger. And it's like, well, every person's different. Every person in the world, cis or trans, is completely different. No two people are identical. And everyone's journey is therefore different. And I think it's really important for trans people not to get caught up in other people's transitions or other people's social media in general. So for me, that's my takeaway from social media. It's like learning, like, I can't compare myself to anyone else's transition. Like, I'm a little jealous of the younger generations who are transitioning. Like, I wonder, like, if my voice would have never dropped if I started, at a different time, or if my vagina could have been, I'm obsessed, but like, could have even been better with surgeries nowadays. you just never know. And I can't look back on that, and I can't.
You can only move forward.
Exactly. So for me, my biggest like takeaway has been like, okay, like you are you. You have to put out the things that inspire you, that you think are great. You have to follow people that inspire you. I unfollowed all the people who made me feel bad about myself, guys and girls, like things that I felt were not unobtainable, but just not healthy for me to see. I deleted all of that. I got rid of that. And I've tried to put that out there. I want to be someone that someone wants to follow. I don't want to just be like, I don't want anyone to follow me because they like aspire to transition just like I did. I want them to follow me because I'm helping them transition in their own way to transition. That makes sense.
Absolutely. And that is such a powerful perspective to have, because it really shapes the way that you use the platform and the content that you do create. Your story is unique, and everyone has their own unique journey. And right now, as everyone is at home and kids have been taken out of school and everything is transitioning to be online, I'm curious what advice you have for young people who are at home and trying to manage their sense of identity in environments where they might not be supported. And so what do you advise that they do, and what sort of online communities do you think that they should look for, or tips even in the real world if it's finding their own sense of self offline?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with the same thing, which is like to not compare yourself to that's the biggest thing, is like not to compare your journey to anyone else's. I think also it's hard because every person is different, and I don't know how people's families will react. So it's hard to give specific advice. I would say that the biggest thing is just being authentic to yourself and acting however is you. Don't try to hide your femininity or masculinity. Don't try to hide yourself. And that's a very easy way to not start transitioning, but kind of getting a feel for like your surroundings and your family and seeing how that could go. I mean, if you're obviously in a situation where you know that you cannot start transitioning, open up about it. You were about to go to college, and maybe in a few months, that's when you thought you could start to get away from your parents and things like that. Like I say, what's best is just in your room, like creating your own fantasy world. That's like for me, what I did when I was younger. And it worked. My blanket was my hair, and I wrapped my sheets around me, and like playing in your room if you can do it safely. And then of course, going online, you can always clear your browser history and things like that. But I think YouTube, I don't do YouTube, but I think it's a great way to find inspirational trans people and just people talking about their stories. And that's really important for these young people at home to do, who cannot feel that they can express themselves or talk openly about being trans or come out as trans or start transitioning while they're at home. I think that, like following influencers and trans people and people who inspire them, and, makeup tutorials and hair tutorials and things that they like can look forward to doing like after quarantine. So learn how to do makeup looks now, learn how to do your hair now. Like, think about style. I have a column on Stylecast.
I need to do that. I need to start working on my hair and makeup looks now.
Yeah, I think like this is a big time to like just start working on ourselves. Like that's something I've been doing, is a lot of self-reflection, picking up a hobby, start reading, because it's really hard to give advice for those who do feel trapped. And I don't specifically know of many online communities, but I'm sure there are on Reddit and Facebook and Instagram. I mean, my page is a community, I feel like, in a lot of ways.
What is your page? Where can our people follow along? Where can these listeners find you?
At I'm Corey Ray on all platforms, and CoreyRay.com. And I do think that it's important to take the steps that you would want to take outside, like take anything that you can here. Also, researching LGBT centers, like the closest to you, is really important. I know a lot of people who live in the Midwest that might not have them in the next big city. It could be interesting for you to look at where that resource could be and what online resources you do have, like in your state, in your city, in this country. Obviously, there's so many foundations right now going on with hotlines for trans and LGBTQ people that you can always call if you really feel like if you need to go out. Your parents will let you go on a walk around the neighborhood. And if that's where you need to call someone for 5, 10, 30 an hour, and express how you're feeling, and that you're not feeling great and you need an outlet, like that's the place to do it. If you need to write me a DM and rant, like that's the place to do it. If you cannot do it at home.
That's fantastic advice. And Corey, I'm so curious, what are you working on right now and what does your future look like? I know that there's much more beyond the Instagram page is only half the story. And so I'd love to hear what else you're doing and what else you're working on so that we can all follow along and continue to support you.
Okay. What am I working on? I'm working on a lot. I think the biggest, most exciting project from right now is the film Queen, which is a feature film based on my high school prom story of becoming the first openly transgender girl to win prom queen. And it is a condensed version of my 2 years of transitioning in high school, and it's kind of a take on those 90s prom stories. So I'm really excited because it's the movie that I wish I had growing up. I didn't have the TV and film and me on a billboard to know that like trans was beautiful. So this is that film for me. So we're working on that and working on putting the best people together for the project. And it's a weird time we're living in, obviously, with every business being halted. So I don't know when production's picking back up, but while that's going, I'm hoping to, get back into modeling and being on acting and being on sets again. I have such a passion for it, and that's what I hope my future lands on is modeling and acting and being in the Hollywood film industry and doing charitable work as well, which I hope to get going. That's another thing I've got in the works, is a little company situation where I can give back. So that's a lot. Yeah, we'll see.
Well, thank you for all that you do and all that you represent. It was so inspirational to be able to learn more about your story. And I know that many young people that are listening to this right now are inspired. So, Corey, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And I look forward to staying in touch and supporting you. You are amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do and for this platform. I appreciate your platform truly. So thank you.